I know our legislators are all on the way, but we're going to have to start this meeting because we have to be out of here before 11 o'clock so they can be sanitized the room. But everyone in here is very COVID-free, I know, but we're still going to take precautions. So, Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Representative Fugit, Representative Heverin,
Present in the room.
Representative Huff,
Present in the room.
Representative McPherson,
Present in the room.
Representative Pratt, Representative Roberts,
Saying who's here.
Representative Stevenson,
I'm in my annex office.
thank you, Representative Petrie, Representative Reed, Representative Upchurch, Chair Santoro.
Present. We do not have any minutes because this is our first meeting. We were being very cautious this year. I'm just going to announce our three new members. Representative Stevenson, she is one of our newest members on this committee, but she's not a new member to the General Assembly. Rachel Roberts, another new member. She is new to this committee, but she's been in the General Assembly. And the only newbie is Representative Sean McPherson. So welcome to the committee. We're without delay, we're going to let Secretary Gray, the floor is yours, and we'll ask questions at the end if that's appropriate. Please proceed. Turn.
Hey, is that better? Is that working now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and greetings to members of the committee. Thank you all for joining us today. I said to Chairman yesterday that I was looking forward to being with you all in person, and things are, fortunately things are going it seems that things are going in a good direction for us soon to be in person in many respects. So I want to thank you too for the opportunity to update you on the aftermath of our recent string of very costly weather disasters. That's what the chairman asked us to do. And today I'm going to be joined, actually virtually, by State Highway Engineer James Ballinger and by our Transportation Department Cabinet Budget Director, Robin Brewer. They're going to both join after I have some opening comments, and going to show you some slides of some of the distressed areas that we have experienced during the last few weeks and months. We have some other very able staff that will be standing by if needed, and one is Jason Sawala, our acting director. Many of you know Jason, our acting highway safety director and assistant highway engineer. I don't have to wear it out that these severe storms have left enormous damage in their wake. I don't have to belabor that fact. This is an image of Kentucky 687 at mile point 1349 in Clay County. You as legislators have seen it personally in your trips back home, of course. When you're at home, you hear about it personally from your constituents. What I'm going to do this morning is pull together some facts and some figures and some slides to try to give a statewide picture and some context. Mr. Chairman, we were specifically asked for this update on flooding. I want to also talk about the weather disaster that preceded the flooding, and that I'm referring to is the 3 consecutive winter storms that hit us back to back. And you really can't separate the first disaster from the second. It's all part of our late winter, early spring weather in Kentucky. I'm going to give a few facts about the patterns of these weather-related disasters. From the beginning, this next slide, from the beginning of 2009 to the end of 2017, as this slide illustrates, 9 years in total, Kentucky had 12 FEMA-related or declared disasters. And that total amount represented $136.6 million, the cost of those disasters. Now, that was for 9 years. Since the beginning of 2018, just 3 years, we've already had 7 disasters, if we include the ice storms and the flooding events, with the 5 which have been reported to FEMA. Those 5, and this is before the ice storms and the flooding events, those 5 totaled $106 million, and damages for the 2 most recent disasters are still being finalized and reported to FEMA. As you all may know, the job of reporting and documenting damage to FEMA, it will be going on for a while yet. It's a challenging effort, and it requires really exacting documentation. We have a better idea of the costs of those 3 straight winter storms, and I'm going to ask Robin Brewer, our budget director. She'll have more to say about that in a few minutes when Robin's on. But it's important to keep a couple of major points in front of us as we discuss these latest challenges. One is that FEMA disaster funding, while it's greatly appreciated, we appreciate it, of course, and it's of clear value, but it's not a silver bullet. First of all, FEMA funding is reimbursed. It's not upfront money. It doesn't come to us up front. We have to draw on our already hard-pressed state funds to cover the cost of any disaster and then apply to FEMA for reimbursement. It's a long and slow process. It's complex. It requires a lot of documentation. The second thing, tied to the first, is that the requirement of upfront state payment further stresses a road fund that's already inadequate for meeting our statewide transportation needs. This slide shows the history. I know that several of you all, or many of you, have already seen this slide. I've presented it several times, and I know, Mr. Chairman, you're very familiar with it. A large part of our available funding for the Cabinet's highway program and all of our county and municipal road money comes from the motor fuels usage fee. As this slide shows, motor fuels revenues have essentially been flat since the price of gasoline, a gallon of gas, fell by almost $2 a gallon in 2015. Our revenues fell by $150 to $180 million a year at that time. That represents far more, actually, than 10% annually of our revenues. And since 2014, KYTC, the Cabinet, has lost more than $1 billion in motor fuel revenue due to the rapid decline in gasoline prices in 2015. Now those numbers are based, just so it's in context, those numbers are based on roughly $1.5 billion of total receipts in our road fund from our vehicle sales and our gasoline fuels, motor fuels tax. So let me draw your attention to this next slide. I wanted this put in writing so it would make an impact. At a time when revenues are decreasing and storm damage has increased, it puts a strain on our ability to execute routine road and maintenance projects. So declining road revenues, the slide I just showed you, combined with increasing storm damage, puts a strain on our ability to execute routine road and maintenance plans. Let me elaborate a bit on that. Members of this subcommittee already know this because you all follow this closely, but it's a point that is often lost on the public. Federal highway funding like FEMA disaster funding, is a reimbursement model. It's not upfront money. It's not given to the state upfront. A state or local match is required for nearly every federal dollar Kentucky receives, and that, on order of magnitude annually, is $736 million. That's really not order of magnitude, that's actual, $736 million. We're hoping, as we sit here today, of course, that the new administration will propose a national infrastructure program that could enable Kentucky to pursue some badly needed but high-dollar transportation projects. Two of those are in particular: the much-needed companion bridge to the Brent Spence between Covington and Cincinnati, and a new I-69 river bridge between Henderson and Evansville. But, and this is what's important about these numbers, Kentucky will not be able to take advantage of this opportunity unless we have the money to put in up front. Okay, let's go to the next slide, Kenny. This slide shows Kentucky's motor fuels usage fee is well below those of most of our neighboring states. Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Virginia, and Tennessee have raised their motor fuels user fees in recent years. It should be noted that for some states, too, the motor fuels user fees are not the only means of funding transportation programs. Tennessee, for example, allocates a portion of its sales tax revenue to transportation. As our neighbor states have adjusted their motor fuels user fees, it's become harder for Kentucky to compete with them, frankly, for new industry. We're often presented with projects where access roads are, of course, required as part of incentives and as part of negotiations. It requires that we invest in road improvements like those we're currently looking to do in Hopkinsville, Kentucky 115 connector near Pembroke, and in Lebanon, the Lebanon Bypass extension. It's been done in the past with projects like the Transpark in Bowling Green that's had enormous, tremendous success, and now today with the Mountain Parkway expansion in eastern Kentucky. That's just to name a couple. We otherwise would not have been able to stimulate economic development in those areas nearly as effectively. And I can say, from being in the economic recruitment business most of my private sector life, that it's incredibly competitive. The states are incredibly competitive, and having these projects is really essential. It's not optional. It's not elective to have the infrastructure and access for manufacturing and for economic development. So to recap, the Federal Highway Program is a reimbursement program. We must use state road funds to pay the project bills initially and then request federal reimbursement for a share of that cost. Once we have adequately funded the care of our existing system, including advance funding for disasters, and covered our state matching fund commitments with the federal government, then we are able to pursue projects in the highway plan. And frankly, that's getting more and more difficult to do, and here's why. Our construction costs are increasing while our motor fuels usage fees are declining. Construction costs, highway construction costs, have increased by more than 25% since 2015. So it doesn't take a lot of math wizardry to figure out that we've got two lines that are converging in the wrong direction. We've got highway construction costs that are increasing, and we've got revenues that are decreasing. Now, that's enough of a context for showing y'all some pictures of the damage, and I'm going to ask our state highway engineer, James Ballinger, former chief district engineer of District 7 in Lexington, where I got to know him when I was mayor and he was chief district engineer. He's doing a great job in this role. And I'm going to ask James to come on. He's virtual virtually with us, and he's going to take us through the next few slides.
Okay. Thank you, Secretary Gray, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to speak today. And as Secretary Gray mentioned in his remarks, the effects of these weather events have been devastating. They've been just terribly devastating to so many people, though, throughout Kentucky, though. With roads closed, people have lost their homes. I've got friends in parts of Kentucky that have lost their livestock. They've lost their barns. It's very devastating, though. And I checked this morning, and at transportation, though, we still have 36 locations, though they're still closed, flooding and to slides across the state. That's spread throughout the whole state. This particular map that I've got on the screen, though, it shows the number of roadway locations that were closed or damaged, heavy rain and the floodwaters on Monday, March 1st, which was just 2 weeks ago. That was the Monday after all the heavy rains that we experienced over the weekend. And the darker the shading on the map, that's the more locations that were actually impacted as a snapshot in time on that day, March 1st. As you can see, from Fulton County to Pike County and many places in between, though, this event had a significant impact on people and their ability to get to where they needed to go. Next slide. The flood event, as the Secretary said, came on the heels of 3 back-to-back winter storm events. At the height of the winter storm, though, the ice storm, though, we had over 150,000 customers, though, in Kentucky that were in the dark and the cold. Downed power lines were blocking our highways and impacting our ability to remove the ice and snow from the roadways. This map shows the severe impacts of the ice storm as a snapshot in time again on February the 11th. As you can see, the area shaded in dark red experienced between 0.4 and 0.7 of an inch of ice accumulation. On February the 14th and 15th, which was basically Valentine's Day weekend, the wave of winter weather rolled across the state with up to 6 to 8 inches of heavy snow in the west and an additional 0.2 to 1/2 inch of sleet and freezing rain in the east. As you can tell, all Kentuckians experienced an impact to some degree by these winter storm events. The citizens living in the northeast part of the state, though, they bore the brunt of these events, though, just due to the number of trees blocking the roadways and the number of downed power lines. Next slide, please. And Mother Nature wasn't through just yet. This map shows the total snow accumulation across Kentucky on the morning of February the 18th, just days later. A good swath of those same areas that had just been impacted to the greatest degree by the ice, though, now had more than 4 inches of snow on the ground, with spot locations that had up to 10 inches of snow. By this point, all of our crews at the Transportation Cabinet and the other responders, first responders, the power companies, their employees and contractors, though, everyone was just exhausted from working around the clock responding to these events. Removing snow and ice from the roadways is a challenge in the best of circumstances, though. But we had 3 statewide events, though, without much, if any, time in between, with significant impact to trees, and the power infrastructure makes it even tougher. At the height of the snow and ice event that we were facing, the Transportation Cabinet, we were investing around $2 million per day to keep people and goods moving across Kentucky. This resulted in a total cost of around $30 million for this particular winter weather event. That's a big number. And I sometimes like to think of it in the context, though, of there is also a big cost if we didn't keep mobility flowing in Kentucky. There's a big cost to commerce and to the people in Kentucky as well. But that's a big number. During the storm, the Transportation Cabinet lost power to a number of our maintenance facilities. They were serving as a base of operations for our response to the winter weather operations. I also want to note that many of our employees, though, in our maintenance facilities, though, they didn't have power at home. families didn't have power at home, and they were coming out working around the clock responding to the weather event. The loss of power also made working with officials and local communities critically important. In one particular situation I would like to highlight, the Big Sandy Water District had pumping stations that lost power. The road was blocked to the pump station sites. They needed to be able to access these pumps in order to place generators to provide water to between 2,000 and 3,000 customers. The roadway was impassable, but we were able to modify our plans so to help get the road opened so they could provide the much needed water to their customers. Next slide, please. Well, as the ice and snow started to melt, seeing a few impacts in areas impacted by the high water, March rains came. The ground was already saturated for melting snow and ice, and then according to the Weather Channel, days of rain that dumped somewhere between 4 to 7 inches of rain across a wide stretch of the state, river levels pushed rivers to levels not seen in decades. Over the course of the event, we had over 500 locations that were impacted by high water and by landslides, which occurred as a result of the rains. Our preliminary flood assessments are still ongoing and won't be completed for a few more weeks. But no matter what these initial costs are to recover and get all the highways reopened, though, there are substantial long-term impacts to Kentucky's transportation network. As you can imagine, after an event of this magnitude, we always have pavements that are washed out, we have structures damaged, and we have landslides all across the highway system. However, we also experience damage to our highways to reveal itself. Many times the pipes are clogged with mud and debris, our ditches need to be reestablished, our roadway, our cuts, and our embankments, they become saturated and they become weakened. And then we see slides that occur in the future during weather events. As well, the lifespan of our pavements and our structures, our bridges and our culverts, though, are reduced as well. It results in higher life cycle costs. We have substantial future investments that we'll have to make to maintain our roads in a safe condition for the traveling public. Next slide. I also want to highlight some of the efforts that we have around that we do around the state, though, in transportation, though, supporting our local communities. Working through the county emergency managers, we receive requests to fulfill local needs of the citizens. We work with the Division of Emergency Management to support our local communities by assisting with fulfillment of these requests. During these last few events, we fulfilled more than 36 resource requests for things such as pallets of safe drinking water, as you can see in the slide there that we're delivering, ready-to-eat meals, and equipment for local governments to use to clean up the local roads. These resources are critical, and it's something I'm very proud to be a part of in the Transportation Cabinet, though, to be able to help the people that are in these hardest hit areas, though, while we help them to meet the basic needs they have, while the recovery and cleanup is ongoing. Okay, with the next few slides, I've got some slides of the flooding event, actually. Kenny, if we'll work through those. This is Kentucky 1499 near Feds Creek in Pike County, and you can see the impact to the roadway as well as the utility, okay? This is Kentucky 158, Ringgold's Mill Road near Hillsborough, the community of Hillsborough in Fleming County. And Kentucky 160 in Knott County with a slide. Just unbelievable. Kentucky 298 in Davis County. And a roadway failure, embankment failure on Kentucky 1937 in Lawrence County. This is quite a photo here. This is a mudslide we're seeing and experiencing in Clay County, though, in Kentucky 577. You can see the TRACO working to try to get the roadway open to back up. Okay, and US 23 overpass on Kentucky 40 in Johnson County. And this one just is heartbreaking, though. Main Street in Beattyville. A lot of us have seen the photos from Lee County and Beattyville, though. It's just unbelievable. Okay. And then a few photos of the triple snow and ice storms that I already discussed and the Secretary mentioned, though. This is our plow, just kind of showing some of the depth of the snow in Breathitt County. And this was taken above Dewey Lake in Floyd County. And down trees in Elliott County, and showing one of our trucks out responding to that event. And one of our backhoes trying to get the road open on Kentucky 7 in Carter County. And just showing the volume of ice in Letcher County on a sign. I thought that was a good photo. And now Kentucky 696 in Clinton County. And this is pretty typical of what we saw all across a good swath of Kentucky, though. You can see the ice, the trees leaning over, the trees weakened and damaged and blocking the roadways. Okay, at this time, I'm gonna turn it over to Robin Brewer. She's the KYTC Budget Director, for some additional comments, and then we'll be ready to take any questions. Thank you.
I just want to make sure, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Proceed.
Yeah, I just want to talk very briefly, just to elaborate on a few points that the Secretary mentioned earlier. So once severe weather is forecasted, the Cabinet begins tracking expenditures for the event from day one, in anticipation that the weather event could be severe enough for the Cabinet to receive federal assistance on a reimbursement basis at some point. Therefore, the Road Fund incurs the immediate expenditures from the Cabinet's efforts in reacting to the event as it happens or soon after. The Road Fund also incurs any expenditures if long-term construction repairs are needed from storm damage to restore a roadway, a bridge, a culvert, etc., to it, at a minimum, its original condition, or maybe even to improve its condition to try to prevent future damage. So once an event has been declared a disaster and the state is eligible for federal assistance from FEMA or another federal agency, expenditures have to be identified as eligible, and significant amounts of very detailed documentation must be provided to FEMA to apply for reimbursement for those eligible costs incurred, which, as the Secretary mentioned, can be a very lengthy process. Ultimately, those expenditures are housed in a restricted fund account to be offset by reimbursements from FEMA. As mentioned by the Secretary, if expenditures are identified and approved by FEMA, FEMA only reimburses the Cabinet for 75% of the costs. The Road Fund must cover the other 25% of the eligible costs, and the Road Fund covers 100% of anything that's not eligible for reimbursement. Not to mention, while those expenditures that are eligible for reimbursement are placed in that restricted fund account, in essence, the Road Fund is still covering that account balance until the FEMA funds are received. In order for the expenditures to be placed into this restricted fund account, there has to be sufficient spending authority or appropriation. As you can imagine, when we historically operate with a biennial budget, it's basically impossible to predict how severe our weather events could be from year to year, and to ensure that we budget adequate spending authority for these types of accounts. In addition, costs from an event can stretch into a future fiscal year, depending on the length of timing of the activity, when the activity has been deemed eligible for reimbursement, etc. As a result, it is important for the Cabinet to be able to have flexibility to request adequate restricted fund appropriation in order to be able to react from a budget perspective to the significant short-term and long-term costs incurred from such events. I mentioned earlier that these expenditures ultimately end up housed in a restricted fund account for reimbursement, which may seem a very minute detail for this meeting today, but I mention it for an important reason. Historically, there has been language in the executive branch bill that allowed agencies the ability to request interim appropriation increases for restricted funds outside of a budget process. However, during the 2020 legislative session, language was inserted into the executive branch budget bill that removed that ability. The ideal solution for the cabinet and likely other state agencies is to have the ability restored in the executive branch budget bill to allow for interim appropriation increases for restricted funds. I'm sure there are other agencies experiencing their own agency-specific issues by no longer having this flexibility, but I can only speak to issues as they relate to the Transportation Cabinet. But bottom line, if the cabinet doesn't have adequate spending authority for restricted funds like this, nor has the ability to request spending authority outside of a budget process, it will force the road fund to have to continue absorbing such costs for an even longer time than normally experienced. The result will be less road funds available for maintenance work, like mowing, striping, pothole patching, as well as less road funds for construction projects across the Commonwealth.
Thank you, Robin, for this great information. Do we have any questions from any members? I do have a comment or a question, Secretary, on comparing the Kentucky's gasoline taxes. I just want our members to understand that that one slide, other states have fees that, like West Virginia, Illinois, Indiana, and Virginia, they all have fees that actually their gas tax, if you include that, it's higher than ours. So what you're seeing is the truth of just gas tax, but then they give other fees. So actually we are so much lower. I know you guys can't predict bad weather, but that all comes out of that road fund, and I greatly appreciate this information. I'm just going to keep kicking around that we have a need for increased funding. I think we can see it. James Ballinger and Robin Brewer, they really laid it out pretty hard to us that there is a definite need. I'm going to keep saying that without funding, we're going to lose out. Have you any comments about the president and possibly a stimulus plan, how we're going to do anything? Do you have any information you could share?
Well, it's probably, can you hear me, Chairman? All right.
Yes.
I was going to say it's arguably speculative on my part, but it does seem to be. Now, you speaking about an infrastructure package?
Yes, I am.
Okay, infrastructure package.
Clarify
yeah.
that.
I've been here for a year, but everything that I hear is that those who have been in these roles longer, like colleagues of mine, counterparts of mine in other states, are saying that they feel more confidence in the likelihood of a major infrastructure package than they have before. That's coming from Jim Timon, who's the head of AASHTO, American Association of Highway Professionals, and other like Jack, Mr. Chairman, Jack Marchbanks in Ohio. He's a counterpart of mine in Ohio, director of Ohio Department of Transportation, and he says that as well. So obviously, what that begs the question of is what kind of funding do we have in order to match what might come our way from any kind of infrastructure package of major significance, and that's really what we're talking about here. We're talking about having the funds that will allow us to get as much as we can. I can tell you that I've already been on the phone trying to get introductions to the new administration, to Mayor Pete Buttigieg's, to Mayor Pete's, the members of his staff, simply so that they know that Kentucky is certainly on the map and that we're poised. We're ready to work with them, with the federal U.S. Department of Transportation, federal highways in any way that we can. That's part of it. I just look at it as in the private sector, many of you all are, that's where you all are. And in the private sector, we all learn that that you've got to get to know folks. And we've got a new administration, and we need to get to know them. We were fortunate, frankly, in the last administration, as you know, Chairman, and as Chairman Upchurch knows, and that with Secretary Chow being a Kentuckian and Todd Inman, her chief of staff, being a Kentuckian, we were fortunate that we had a line of communication there. And when we needed help, like we needed help on the Brent Spence Bridge overnight, we were able to get it. We want to have similar relationships with the new administration.
Thank you. So here we are, snow, ice, flooding, damage. We have to fund that. Then we may have the blessing of a big infrastructure funding. 80-20 match, 90-10. There's going to be something out there. I guess our biggest problem is we can't print money, and we're going to have to do something. And the only way we can do it is to make it a reasonable and a fair gasoline tax, because that's the only way we can get funding, because our great fathers found out that we have the Constitution, the general fund has to stay in general fund, and transportation has to stay in transportation. So I'm just preaching to the choir here, I hope, because, you know, infrastructure funding means jobs and means economic development. So I want to say thank you to everyone. Any other questions, comments? If not, I know. Go ahead, Mr. Secretary. Floor is yours.
I was just going to say one, if just as a footnote to what we're already saying. You know, when I came into this job a little over a year ago, I came in open-minded and objective. I had tried to read and study, but I didn't know the severity of the challenge that we have with funding until I was in the job, of course, for a few months. And then it really dawned on me that, you know, when we were getting requests from county judges and from mayors all across the state for funding in the various buckets that we've got, and it was like, well, we've reached the bottom of the barrel, and now we're going to have to go after the barrel itself. The resources just aren't there for the needs that we have, especially, I mean, the backlog on needs is something like $500 million just in maintenance. And that, when you look at it on our total budget of a little over $2 billion annually, that leaves very little for new projects, frankly, the ones that are going to stimulate the economy the way that, and provide jobs the way that we really need to. So
thank you very much.
Thank you.
If there's no further, we'll take the motion to adjourn. So moved. Thank you all for coming, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you,
Thank you and your team.
You bet.